Evolution Unit, Lesson 3, Charles Darwin. In this lesson, we're going to explore the science and engineering practices of constructing explanations and designing solutions, engaging in an argument from evidence, obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information, and our cross-cutting concepts are patterns, cause and effect, structure and function, and stability and change. According to the theory of evolution, life on Earth began at least 3,500 million years ago. So what do you think the earliest life forms were like? All of life on Earth evolved from very similar organisms. Dinosaurs only appeared 3.325 million years ago. There are many theories of how life first appeared on Earth, but lack of evidence has made it difficult to know which theory is correct. Darwin's theory of evolution. In the mid-1800s, the British naturalist Charles Darwin proposed a new theory for evolution. Darwin proposed that evolution took place through a process called natural selection. He developed his theory based on observations he made on a round-the-world trip on the ship HMS Beagle. He also carried out many experiments, had discussions with fellow scientists, and used evidence from fossils. Darwin and natural selection. Natural selection is a scientific theory. This is an explanation proposed by scientists following scientific investigation. Darwin spent over 30 years of research on fossils and living plant and animal species, and eventually came to his theory of evolution by natural selection. He used natural selection to explain how different species are related to each other, as well as how species become adapted to their environment. Looking at Charles Darwin's life. From 1825 to 1831, he studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh. He left in his second year of study for the clergy at Christ's College, which was in Cambridge. He became fascinated by natural history. He was a very keen naturalist, and he enjoyed studying naturalism in his spare time. From 1831 to 1836, he was the naturalist on the HMS Beagle. HMS stands for His Majesty's Ship. During this time, he visited the Galápagos Islands. He made detailed notes about the animals that he found, and he also collected specimens of animal skins, plants, and insects, along with fossils and shells while he was on this voyage. He was extremely good at keeping accurate and detailed notes. From 1846 to 1854, he returned home, and he began an 8-year-long study of barnacles in order to establish his scientific expertise and gather evidence before publishing his ideas. Specifically, he eventually published his ideas on evolution and natural selection only after other individuals began to put together similar ideas. From 1859 to 1864, he really focused his work on the origin of species, which was his major publication. In 1859, that book went on sale. The book caused great controversy among scientists and the public, as there was very little scientific evidence, and it contradicted what was written in the Bible at the time. From 1864 to 1882, in the later years of Darwin's life, the controversy over his work decreased, and he published a book describing the evolution of humans. There was minimal outcry during that time, especially from the church. Today, Darwin's theory of evolution is considered a central concept in biology. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck was also another individual that studied change in organisms over time. He was a French scientist. He believed that species evolved because they inherited characteristics acquired through the over or underuse of body parts. So how would this theory explain a giraffe's long neck? The short-necked ancestors of modern giraffes needed to reach the leaves on tall trees when food was scarce. And so over time, the giraffes stretched their necks, making them longer. This characteristic was then passed on to their offspring. And so Jean-Baptiste Lamarck's ideas were more about the use or disuse of characteristics than they were about the genetic inheritance of specific traits. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck thought that if a giraffe needed to use its neck and make it slightly longer, then it would use that characteristic for long periods of time, and eventually the neck would become very long. And then that organism would pass that specific trait on to its offspring. Darwin's theory of natural selection was very different. He found that individual organisms within a species showed variation in their characteristics. He observed that organisms have to compete with each other in order to survive. He found that organisms with characteristics that made them better suited to their environment would be better competitors. He concluded that individuals with an advantageous characteristic were more likely to survive and therefore pass on that characteristic to the next generation. He termed this natural selection. While on his voyage on the HMS Beagle, he spent a substantial amount of time in the Galápagos Islands. And in the Galápagos Islands, he noticed that finches with different types of beaks lived on each island. Some finches had large and strong beaks, suitable for crushing seeds. Others had thin, delicate beaks, suitable for picking insects from holes in the ground. He observed that the type of beak a particular finch had was adapted to the environment that particular finch was found in. This gave the finch a better chance to survive and breed. So looking deeper at the finches and natural selection, Darwin believed that all finches had evolved from a common ancestor on the mainland of South America. Natural variation meant that some finches developed slightly different beaks. These finches were able to eat alternative types of food and avoid competition, making them more likely to survive and pass on their characteristics. So what kind of evidence could Darwin use in 1856? The first type of evidence that Darwin used was living species, followed by fossils, comparative anatomy, and artificial selection. Darwin was able to formulate his theory without any of the molecular evidence that we use to support his theories today. Darwin noticed that different Galapagos Islands had finches with different specialized beaks. Some had strong beaks suitable for crushing seeds. Others had more delicate beaks suitable for picking insects from holes. Darwin thought that all finches could have evolved from one species with a generalized beak shape. He also used evidence from the fossil record. The fossil record has revealed many ancient organisms that appear to be transitions between different animal groups. Acanthostegera is such a missing link that has a mixture of fish and tetrapod traits. Their bodies are very weak in structure. They had a tail fin. They had gills that allowed them to breathe in the water. And they also had 4 limbs with 8 digits. So the thought is that this particular organism was allowed to survive in marshy or aquatic ecosystems where it could also pull itself up onto land. Darwin used comparative anatomy. The limbs of living and extinct vertebrates show many similarities in their bones. This suggests the organisms are likely to have evolved from a common ancestor. So looking at the different species of organisms, we see that many of them have similar characteristics. For example, each of these different species have a humerus. They also contain the bone structure of an ulna, a radius, as well as carpals. Darwin also looked at this idea of artificial selection. Specifically, he looked at the domestication of animals. And the domestication of animals shows that animals can undergo dramatic changes over a relatively short number of generations. Animals have been selectively bred for centuries by humans, leading to a wide range of dog breeds, cows that produce milk, along with cat breeds, and various pigeon species. As humans select for specific characteristics, organisms exhibit those characteristics. Many different theories of evolution have been proposed. 2 of the best known are those suggested by Lamarck and Darwin. And so we're going to look at a number of statements and identify whether they best fit Lamarck or whether they best fit Darwin's ideas. Evolution occurs by natural selection. This was a hallmark of Darwin's theory. This theory is unlikely as acquired characteristics do not affect genes. This was a characteristic of Lamarck's ideas. He specifically thought that organisms' use and disuse led to what the offsprings ended up with as far as characteristics. Genes which give an organism a comparative advantage will be selected, or a competitive advantage will be selected. This was an idea of Darwin's. Genes that are allowing an organism to be competitively advanced will end up in higher and higher frequency. Evolution occurs by the inheritance of acquired characteristics. Again, this was an idea of Darwin's. Changes that occur in an organism over its lifetime can be inherited. This was an idea of Lamarck. And acquired characteristics cannot be inherited. This was an idea of Lamarck. It looks like we flip-flopped 2 of them. Evolution occurs by the inheritance of acquired characteristics. Should have gone over in Lamarck. And acquired characteristics cannot be inherited. Should have gone over in Darwin's ideas. Alfred Russel Wallace and Charles Darwin. Darwin was at first unwilling to publish his findings. He knew that they would lead to a great amount of controversy. Then the British naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace proposed an almost identical theory of natural selection to Darwin. And in 1858, Wallace and Darwin published a joint scientific paper on natural selection as the driving force for evolution. This prompted Darwin to finally use all of his evidence to publish his book on the origin of species in 1959. It was very controversial at the time. On the Origin of Species attracted widespread interest. This is because it was written for a non-specialist audience, meaning that it was written for people that were not necessarily scientists. So it was acceptable or accessible for lots and lots of people. And the British Victorian Society was shocked by Darwin's theory, as it challenged the common belief that God made all animals and plants on Earth in a fashion that did not allow for them to change over time. Darwin's theory conflicted with Christian beliefs. There was also insufficient evidence to convince many scientists of the time. As a result, his theory was only gradually accepted. So could Darwin's theory explain everything? At the time Darwin proposed his theory of evolution, DNA and genes had not been discovered. This meant he was unable to explain why characteristics varied between individuals of the same species or how they were inherited. It was not until 50 years after Darwin's theory was first published that this mechanism, this driving force of inheritance and variation, was discovered. And specifically, it was discovered by Gregor Mendel, who was a monk. We now have evidence to support Darwin's theory. This means it is now accepted by modern scientists as the best explanation for how species evolve over time. DNA evidence for evolution. The discovery of genes has helped scientists to build on Darwin's theory. For example, DNA from different organisms can now be compared, and we will look at this in future lessons. The fewer the differences, the less time since they shared a common ancestor. So, for example, 98% of human and chimpanzees' genes are the same. So what does this tell us about their evolution? It is relatively short time since they both evolved from a shared common ancestor. Not that humans came from apes, but that they had a shared common ancestor.